The scorching sun beat down on Sarah Barlow's brow as she trudged barefoot across the endless plains of Arizona Territory, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, the other clutching a small cloth bundle containing everything she had left in the world. It was 1878, and the unforgiving landscape of the American West cared little for a woman in her condition, 7 months pregnant, alone, and desperate. Her cracked lips formed silent prayers as she placed one blistered foot in front of the other. The distant mountains shimmered like a mirage, seemingly no closer than they had been hours ago. Sarah had been walking for 2 days now, her water canteen empty since noon, her last morsel of food gone by sundown yesterday. But she kept moving, for the child within her was her only reason to continue this desperate journey. She had fled Tucson in the dead of night after her husband's creditors had come calling, threatening to collect their debts in blood. Thomas had gambled away everything they owned, then disappeared without a trace, leaving Sarah to face the consequences. The men who'd visited her small room above the laundry where she worked had made their intentions clear. They would take what was owed one way or another. So she had run, heading north toward the mining settlements where she'd heard a woman could find honest work. Chloride was her destination, a silver boomtown she knew only from whispered stories of fortune and opportunity. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, moving steadily closer. Sarah felt a flutter of fear. Out here, strangers meant danger more often than salvation. She considered hiding but knew the flat terrain offered no shelter. Instead, she straightened her back as much as her pregnancy would allow and continued forward, one painful step after another. The rider approached at an unhurried pace, his silhouette growing more distinct against the vast blue sky. A tall man on a chestnut stallion, wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare. Sarah tensed as he drew closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The horseman slowed his mount to match her pace, riding silently beside her for several minutes. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his eyes a piercing blue beneath the shadow of his hat. A revolver hung at his hip, and the leather of his saddle creaked with each step of his horse. Sarah didn't speak, neither did he. The man simply reached into his saddlebag and extended a canteen toward her without a word. Her throat burned with thirst, but pride made her hesitate. "Take it," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "You need it more than I do." She accepted the canteen with trembling hands and took a careful sip, then another. The water was warm but sweeter than any she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered, offering it back. He waved his hand. "Keep it for now." Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to find a pregnant woman walking barefoot through the desert, he asked, "You heading to Chloride?" Sarah nodded, surprised. "So am I," he said simply. "Name's Lucas Keller." "Sarah Barlow," she replied, not knowing whether to trust this quiet stranger but having little choice in the matter. Lucas dismounted in one fluid motion and led his horse beside her. "Chloride's still 20 miles north," he said, studying her blistered feet. "You won't make it like this." Sarah lifted her chin. "I have to." A hint of admiration flashed across his face. "Nobody said you wouldn't make it at all, just not like this." He gestured to his horse. "Copper here can carry two." Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Keller." "It's not charity, it's common sense." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I don't make a habit of leaving women and children to die in the desert." Sarah considered her options, which were painfully few. Her feet were raw and bleeding, her strength nearly gone. The baby kicked within her as if urging her to accept the offer. "I can pay my way once we reach Chloride," she said finally. "I'm a hard worker." Lucas nodded, accepting her terms without question. "Can you mount up, or do you need help?" pried Ward with practicality. "I might need some assistance," she admitted reluctantly. With gentle efficiency, Lucas helped her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite the necessity of their proximity. "Why are you going to Chloride?" Sarah asked as the horse began to move, grateful for the relief from walking but uncomfortable with the silence. "Work," Lucas replied. "I drive cattle mostly, but the silver mines are paying top dollar for guards right now." Sarah felt herself relaxing slightly against the saddle. "I heard there's work for women too." Laundry, cooking, mending. There is, he confirmed. Mining towns always need women's work done, but it's rough country. I'm tougher than I look, she said, and for the first time, Lucas Keller smiled a small, genuine expression that transformed his stern face. That, Mrs. Barlow, I can believe. They rode in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Sarah found herself nodding off, exhaustion overtaking her after days without proper rest. You can lean back, Lucas said quietly. I won't let you fall. Hesitantly, she allowed herself to rest against his chest, her eyelids heavy. Why, she murmured, sleep clouding her thoughts. Why what? Why help me? You didn't even ask why I'm out here alone. She felt rather than heard his sigh. Out here, a person's reasons are their own. Sometimes the why doesn't matter as much as what needs doing now. Sarah wanted to respond, but exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks, cradled between the steady heartbeat of a stranger and the gentle rhythm of the horse beneath them. Lucas held the sleeping woman carefully, mindful of her condition and the fragile trust she'd placed in him. Her auburn hair, loosened from its pins, caught the last golden rays of sunlight. He'd spotted her from a distance, a solitary figure moving with stubborn determination across the unforgiving landscape, and something about her courage had stirred him. He'd buried his own wife and unborn child 5 years ago in Kansas after a raid on their homestead. Since then, he drifted westward, taking whatever honest work he could find, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Yet something about Sarah Barlow's quiet dignity reached past the walls he'd built around himself. As twilight descended, Lucas guided Copper toward a small outcropping of rocks that would provide shelter for the night. Tomorrow, they would reach Chloride, and he would see this woman safely to whatever new life she sought there. Then he told himself firmly they would part ways, and he would continue his solitary journey. But as Sarah murmured in her sleep, one hand protectively cradling her unborn child, Lucas Keller found himself hoping that Chloride might have room for both their dreams. The night air turned cool as darkness fell over the Arizona desert. Lucas carefully dismounted, cradling Sarah in his arms to avoid waking her. He settled her on his bedroll beneath the rocky overhang, using his saddle as a pillow for her. He tended to Copper, removing the saddle and bridle, then gathering enough scrub to build a small fire. Sarah stirred as the flames cast dancing shadows across the stone. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "About 10 miles outside of Chloride," Lucas answered, offering her jerky and hardtack from his provisions. "We'll get there by midday tomorrow if we start at dawn." Sarah accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of her ravenous hunger. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the debt she felt. Lucas busied himself with making coffee in a small tin pot. "You should rest. The road ahead isn't easy." "None of them are," she replied softly, and something in her tone made him look up. "Your husband?" Lucas asked carefully. Sarah's face hardened. "Gone, took our savings, left his debts." Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Left us." Lucas nodded, asking no more questions, but Sarah felt compelled to continue. He was a dreamer. Always the next big opportunity, the chance to strike it rich. She stared into the fire. "I believed him for too long." "Men like that can be convincing," Lucas said, pouring coffee into a tin cup and passing it to her. "Were you always a cattleman?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "No, had a farm in Kansas once, lost it." He didn't elaborate, and Sarah didn't press. They sat in silence, the crackling fire and distant howl of coyotes the only sounds in the vast darkness. "Will you stay in Chloride?" Sarah finally asked. Lucas shrugged. "For a time, never stay anywhere too long these days." "Why not?" He studied the coffee in his cup. "Nothing to stay for." The simplicity of his answer revealed depths of loneliness that matched her own, and Sarah felt a strange connection to this quiet man who had saved her without question. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words escaping before she could reconsider. Lucas looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Of what? Everything, having this baby alone, finding work, surviving." She managed a weak smile. "Failing." "You walked barefoot through the desert to give your child a chance," Lucas said, his voice low and certain. That's not the action of someone who fails. His faith in her, unearned and unexpected, brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to appear weaker than she already had. Get some sleep, Sarah, Lucas said gently. I'll keep watch. She lay down, pulled his blanket around her shoulders, and closed her eyes, aware of his steady presence across the fire. For the first time since Thomas had disappeared, she didn't feel completely alone. Dawn broke in streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Lucas had remained awake most of the night, allowing himself only brief moments of rest, his senses attuned to the sounds of the desert. He watched as Sarah slept, her face relaxed in slumber, looking younger and more vulnerable than the determined woman who had been walking alone through the wilderness. He rekindled the fire and prepared more coffee, the familiar routine grounding him. Sarah stirred at the smell, opening her eyes slowly. Morning, Lucas said, handing her a cup. She sat up, wincing slightly as she stretched. Did you sleep at all? Enough, he replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. They shared a simple breakfast of the remaining jerky and hardtack, then prepared to continue their journey. Lucas helped Sarah onto copper, noting with concern how she pressed a hand to her back. Are you in pain? He asked. Just the usual discomfort, she assured him, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. The baby is active this morning. Lucas mounted behind her and they set off toward Chloride, the sun climbing steadily higher as they rode. The landscape began to change, rocky outcroppings giving way to scattered piñon pines and juniper. In the distance, the mountains that had seemed like a mirage now took solid form, their peaks etched against the clear blue sky. What will you do in Chloride? Lucas asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. Find work first, Sarah replied. A place to stay, then prepare for the baby. She twisted slightly to look at him. I was a laundress in Tucson. Before that, I taught school for a while in Texas. A school teacher. Lucas seemed surprised. Sarah nodded. For 3 years until I met Thomas, he had grand plans, spoke beautifully about the life we would build. Her voice held no bitterness now, only resignation. I believed every word. Hope's a powerful thing, Lucas said quietly. So is love, Sarah added, then fell silent, lost in memories. As the sun reached its zenith, the first buildings of Chloride appeared on the horizon. The town had sprung up quickly around the silver strikes, a collection of wooden structures dominated by the head frames of mines that dotted the surrounding hillsides. Activity buzzed around the main street, wagons loaded with ore, miners coming off their shifts, merchants hawking goods to newly paid workers. Sarah tensed as they approached, the reality of her situation becoming clear again. She was a pregnant woman without husband or family, arriving in a rough mining town with nothing but the clothes on her back. Lucas felt her anxiety. I know someone here, he said as they rode toward the main street. Widow named Alina Wright, runs a boarding house for respectable folk. She might have worked for you too. You don't have to, Sarah began. I know I don't, Lucas interrupted gently, but I'd like to see you settled before I go. Sarah wanted to protest further but recognized the practicality of accepting his help. Thank you, she said instead. They drew curious glances as they rode down the main street of Chloride. A pregnant woman sharing a horse with a trail-worn cowboy was an unusual sight, even in a town accustomed to the unconventional. Lucas guided Copper toward a 2-story clapboard house set slightly back from the main street. A painted sign reading Wright's Lodging, Clean Rooms, Fair Rates hung from the porch. Window boxes filled with hardy desert flowers added a touch of civilization to the frontier building. Before they could dismount, the front door opened, and a stout woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged onto the porch. She shaded her eyes against the sun, then her face broke into a wide smile. Lucas Keller, as I live and breathe. She called, descending the steps with surprising agility for her age. I got your letter last month but wasn't sure when to expect you. Lucas helped Sarah down from the horse before dismounting himself. Mrs. Wright, he greeted the older woman with genuine warmth. Thank you for holding that job for me. Alina Wright's sharp eyes moved from Lucas to Sarah, taking in her condition, her travel-worn appearance, and the absence of shoes on her blistered feet. "And who might this be?" she asked, her tone curious but kind. "Sarah Barlow," Lucas answered. "She's looking for lodging and work in Chloride. I found her on the trail yesterday." Alina raised an eyebrow but asked no questions about the circumstances. Instead, she stepped forward and took Sarah's hand. "Any friend of Lucas is welcome here. Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a proper meal and a rest." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "I can pay," she said quickly, "once I find work. I'm good with laundry, cooking, sewing. We'll discuss all that after you've had a chance to catch your breath," Alina interrupted, guiding her toward the house. Over her shoulder, she called to Lucas, "Stable your horse around back and come in for dinner. You look half-starved yourself." Lucas nodded, leading Copper toward the small stable behind the boarding house. Sarah glanced back at him, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes, before disappearing into the house with Alina. Inside, the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished. Alina led Sarah to a small parlor and insisted she sit in a comfortable armchair. "Now," the older woman said, sitting across from her, "I won't pry into your business, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. How far along are you?" "About 7 months, I think," Sarah replied. "And the father?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Not in the picture." Alina nodded, accepting this without judgment. "Are you running from trouble?" "Not the kind that would follow me here," Sarah assured her. "My husband left debts in Tucson, but I doubt his creditors would bother tracking me all this way." "Good," Alina said decisively. "I run a respectable house, but I'm not one to turn away a woman in need." She studied Sarah thoughtfully. "I could use help with the laundry and mending. The miners and cowboys staying here generate enough dirty clothes to keep 3 women busy. It's not easy work, especially in your condition, but it comes with room and board." "I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. "When can I start?" Alina laughed. "After you've bathed, eaten, and rested." "Tomorrow is soon enough." She rose. "Come along, I'll show you to a room where you can freshen up." She led Sarah upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. "It's not much, but it's private. Bathrooms down the hall you'll have to share with the other women." "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, overcome by the simple luxury of a room of her own after weeks of uncertainty. Alina patted her shoulder. "Get cleaned up. I'll find you something to wear and have food ready when you come down." At the door, she paused. "Lucas is a good man, you know, one of the best I've known in this rough country." "We only met yesterday," Sarah said quickly. "He just helped me get here safely." Was all Alina said before closing the door behind her. Left alone, Sarah sank onto the bed, the events of the past days catching up to her. Tears of exhaustion and relief streamed down her face as she placed both hands on her swollen belly. "We made it," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're safe now." Downstairs, Lucas had entered through the kitchen door and was washing up at the sink when Alina returned. "That girl's been through hell," she said without preamble. Lucas dried his hands on a nearby towel. "She's strong. Had to be, walking through the desert in her condition." Alina gave him a pointed look. "What's your interest in her, Lucas?" "Just helping someone who needed it," he replied, his tone neutral. Alina hummed skeptically. "Well, she'll be staying here, working for me until the baby comes at least." Lucas nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Good, she'll do well for you." "And you?" Alina asked. "Still planning to take that job at the Silver Bell mine?" "That's the plan. Guard work pays better than driving cattle these days." Alina began stirring a pot of stew on the stove. "They're putting men in the ground every week from cave-ins and claim disputes. Guard work is dangerous." Lucas shrugged. "Life is dangerous." "Doesn't have to be lonely, though," Alina said pointedly. Before Lucas could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced Sarah's return. She had bathed and changed into a simple calico dress that Alina had provided. It was slightly large but clean and whole. Her damp hair was neatly braided, and though exhaustion still lined her face, she looked more composed than she had on the trail. Lucas stood as she entered the kitchen, struck by the transformation. Without the dust of travel, her features were delicate, her skin fair despite the sun exposure. Her eyes, a warm brown, met his briefly before shifting away. "Mrs. Wright has offered me work here," she told him, her hands clasped in front of her. She'll be a great help to me, Alina added, setting plates on the kitchen table. Now both of you sit and eat before you fall over. The meal was simple but delicious venison stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves. Sarah ate with careful restraint despite her hunger, while Lucas consumed his portion with the efficiency of a man accustomed to eating when food was available, regardless of appetite. The Silver Bells foreman will be expecting you tomorrow, Alina told Lucas as she refilled his coffee cup. He's paying top dollar for men who can handle a gun and keep trouble down. Sarah looked up, a flicker of concern crossing her face. Is it dangerous work? Can be, Lucas admitted. Silver shipments attract attention from claimed jumpers and bandits. Lucas has a reputation for being the kind of man others don't cross, Alina explained. That's valuable in a place like Chloride. A heavy silence fell over the table, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lucas pushed back his chair. I should find a room for the night, he said, reaching for his hat. Don't be ridiculous, Alina scolded. I've got space here. Your usual room is available. Lucas hesitated, glancing at Sarah. It's your boarding house too, Sarah said softly. I'm the newcomer. Settled then, Alina declared. Lucas, you know where everything is. I'm going to show Sarah the laundry room and explain her duties for tomorrow. She turned to Sarah. Nothing strenuous tonight, just familiarizing you with the work. As the women left the kitchen, Lucas remained at the table, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. He hadn't planned on staying at Alina's. He'd intended to take a room at one of the saloons near the mine. But now that Sarah was here, he felt a strange reluctance to distance himself from her. He told himself it was merely concern for her welfare, a natural protectiveness toward someone vulnerable he had helped. But as he sat alone in the quiet kitchen, Lucas Keller admitted to himself that there was something in Sarah Barlow's quiet dignity and courage that had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried beneath the Kansas soil. Days passed, falling into a rhythm of work and rest. Sarah quickly proved herself invaluable to Alina, managing the laundry with efficiency despite her advancing pregnancy. The physical labor was demanding, but after the terror of her flight from Tucson and the desperate trek across the desert, the security of regular meals and a safe place to sleep felt like luxury. Lucas began his work at the Silver Bell mine, guarding ore shipments and maintaining order among the rougher elements that gravitated to the mining camp. His days were long, often taking him away from the boarding house before dawn and returning him after dark. Yet despite their different schedules, Sarah and Lucas found themselves sharing occasional moments, a quiet breakfast when his guard shift ended as her day began, or a few minutes in the evening when she would bring fresh coffee to the porch where he often sat, watching the stars appear over the mountains. Their conversations were brief, ordinary exchanges about the weather or happenings in town, but beneath ran a current of mutual respect and growing interest that neither acknowledged openly. 2 weeks after their arrival in Chloride, Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when a wave of dizziness swept over her. She gripped the clothesline, breathing deeply until the sensation passed. You should rest, Lucas's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned, surprised to see him in the middle of the day. Your shift ended early, changed to nights starting tomorrow, he explained, stepping forward to take the basket of wet linens from her hands. Let me help with these. I can manage, she protested, but without much conviction. Lucas continued pinning sheets to the line. Alina says you've been working from sunup to sundown. There's a lot to do, Sarah replied, reluctantly letting him assist, and I want to save as much as I can before the baby comes. Lucas worked in silence for a moment, his large hands surprisingly deft with the wooden clothespins. You've been avoiding the doctor, he said finally, not looking at her. Sarah stiffened. Alina's been talking too much. She worries about you, so do I. The simple admission hung in the air between them. Sarah smoothed a pillowcase on the line, using the task to hide her expression. Dr. Wilson has a good reputation, Lucas continued. He delivered the Miller twins last month. Both mother and babies are doing well. It's not that, Sarah said quietly. Then what? She sighed, finally meeting his gaze. Doctors cost money I'm saving for when I can't work. Understanding dawned on Lucas's face. Without another word, he finished hanging the last sheet, then reached into his pocket and extracted a folded banknote. "Take it," he said, holding it out to her. Sarah shook her head. "I can't." "You can and you will," Lucas insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "For the baby, if not for yourself. Why do you care so much?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Lucas looked away, his profile sharp against the afternoon sun. "I had a wife once and a child on the way." His voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I lost them both because I wasn't there when they needed care." Sarah felt the weight of his confession, the burden of grief he carried. Slowly, she took the money from his outstretched hand. "I'll see Dr. Wilson tomorrow," she promised. "Thank you." The relief in his eyes made her heart ache. They finished hanging the laundry in companionable silence, the unspoken understanding between them deepening with each shared task. When the work was done, they walked together toward the house. "Lucas," Sarah said as they reached the back door, Would you come with me?" "To the doctor's, I mean." She hurried to explain, "Not in the room, of course, but just to I'll be there," he interrupted gently. "What time?" 10 o'clock. "I'll meet you on the porch," he said, and something in the way he looked at her as if she were precious and surprising made Sarah's breath catch. Before she could respond, Alina called from inside, asking for help with dinner preparations. Sarah gave Lucas a quick smile and disappeared into the house, leaving him standing in the yard, his expression thoughtful as he watched her go. The following morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect late autumn day in the Arizona Territory. Sarah dressed with particular care, selecting the least worn of the second-hand dresses Alina had procured for her. Her advancing pregnancy made proper fit difficult, but she had cleverly altered this navy blue gown to accommodate her condition while maintaining an appearance of respectability. At precisely 10 o'clock, she stepped onto the front porch of the boarding house to find Lucas waiting, his usual trail-worn clothing replaced by a clean shirt and his least scuffed boots. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair, small changes that suggested he'd taken similar care with his appearance. "Good morning," he said, rising from the porch chair. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Sarah replied, though in truth she had lain awake much of the night, her thoughts a confused tangle of practical concerns and unexpected feelings for the quiet cowboy who had become her unlikely champion. They walked side by side down the main street of Chloride, drawing curious glances from townspeople who had grown accustomed to seeing the pregnant newcomer at the boarding house, but not in the company of the taciturn mine guard, Dr. Wilson's office occupied the front room of a small clapboard building near the center of town. A bell jingled cheerfully as they entered, announcing their arrival to the young woman seated at a desk in the waiting area. "Mrs. Barlow?" the receptionist asked, consulting a ledger. "The doctor is expecting you, and is this?" She glanced questioningly at Lucas. "A friend," Sarah said quickly. "He's just accompanying me." The receptionist nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Please have a seat, the doctor will be with you shortly." They sat on a wooden bench against the wall, close but not touching. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap, suddenly nervous. "It will be fine," Lucas said softly, noticing her anxiety. "It's not the examination I'm worried about," she confessed. "It's what comes after. The baby being alone, making a life for us." Lucas hesitated, then covered her restless hands with one of his own. "You're not alone, Sarah, not anymore." Before she could respond, a door opened and a middle-aged man with kind eyes and spectacles appeared. "Mrs. Barlow," he called. Sarah rose, giving Lucas's hand a quick squeeze before letting go. "That's me. Come through, please." The doctor held the door, then looked at Lucas. "Would the father like to join us for the consultation afterward?" Both Sarah and Lucas froze at the assumption. Color rose in Sarah's cheeks. "He's not," she began. "I'll wait here," Lucas said simultaneously. Dr. Wilson looked between them, then nodded without comment. "Very well. This way, Mrs. Barlow." The examination room was small but scrupulously clean, medical instruments arranged neatly on a side table, a folding screen providing privacy in one corner. The doctor was professional and gentle, asking Sarah about her symptoms, her medical history, and the circumstances of her pregnancy. Sarah answered honestly but briefly, offering no details about Thomas's abandonment or her flight from Tucson. Dr. Wilson seemed to understand her reticence and asked only what was necessary for her care. After examining her, he helped her dress and invited her to sit across from him at a small desk. "The baby appears healthy and is positioned normally," he told her, his tone reassuring. "However, you're showing signs of exhaustion and mild malnourishment that concern me." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "I had a difficult journey before arriving in Chloride." "So I gathered," the doctor said kindly. "My prescription is simple but non-negotiable: more rest, more food, particularly meat and fresh vegetables when available, and no heavy lifting or strenuous work." "I have to work," Sarah protested. "The baby will be here in less than 2 months and I need to prepare." "Working yourself to collapse won't help your child," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "I'll speak to Mrs. Wright about modifying your duties." He wrote something in a notebook. "I'd also like you to take iron tonic daily. You can get it at Harper's Mercantile." He named a price that made Sarah grateful for Lucas's contribution. "One more thing," the doctor added as she prepared to leave. "Is there someone who can be with you when the time comes? A friend, perhaps?" Sarah thought of Alina, who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Yes," she said, "I believe so." "Good, send for me at the first signs of labor, no matter the hour," he smiled reassuringly. "You and your baby will be fine, Mrs. Barlow. You're stronger than you realize." In the waiting room, Lucas stood immediately when Sarah emerged. "Everything all right?" he asked, studying her face anxiously. "Yes," she assured him. "The baby's healthy, I just need more rest and better food." Relief washed over his features. "That can be arranged." They thanked the doctor and stepped back into the sunlight. Instead of turning toward the boarding house, however, Lucas guided her toward Harper's Mercantile. "We need to get your medicine," he said when she looked questioningly at him. "Lucas, you've done enough," Sarah protested. The money for the doctor was more than generous. He stopped, turning to face her fully. "Sarah, please let me do this." Something in his expression, earnest, almost vulnerable, made further protest impossible. "All right," she agreed softly. "Thank you." Inside the Mercantile, while the pharmacist prepared the iron tonic, Lucas disappeared among the shelves. He returned as Sarah was paying for her medicine, his arms full of parcels. "What's all this?" she asked as they left the store. "Things you need," Lucas replied, shifting the packages. "Shoes that fit, warmer stockings, fabric for baby clothes." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Alina helped me make a list yesterday." Sarah stopped in the middle of the boardwalk, tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Lucas set the packages down carefully. "Because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because when I found you on that trail, walking barefoot toward an uncertain future, I saw someone who refused to give up despite everything. Someone brave enough to keep going when most would have surrendered." He took a deep breath. "I've been running from my past for 5 years, Sarah. Moving from place to place, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. But watching you these past weeks, your courage, your determination, it's made me wonder if there might be another way to live." Sarah stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of his unexpected confession. "I'm not asking anything of you," Lucas continued quickly. "I know you've been hurt, betrayed. I know you need time. I just want you to understand that you're not alone, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to help you and your child." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Lucas assured her. He picked up the packages. "Let's get you back to Alina's." "Doctor's orders, you need rest." They walked back to the boarding house in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. But something had shifted between them. A door had opened, revealing possibilities neither had dared consider before. As autumn deepened toward winter, life in Chloride settled into a new pattern for Sarah. Following Dr. Wilson's instructions, Alina had rearranged her duties, assigning her lighter work like mending and folding rather than the heavy washing and hanging. Sarah found herself with more time to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny garments from the fabric Lucas had bought. Lucas, too, had made changes. He'd spoken to the mine foreman and arranged to work day shifts exclusively, explaining that he had responsibilities that required him to be available in the evenings. The adjustment meant slightly lower pay but regular hours that allowed him to be at the boarding house each night. Though nothing had been formally declared between them, Lucas had become a constant presence in Sarah's life. Each evening they shared dinner with Alina and the other boarders, then often sat together on the porch or in the small parlor, talking quietly about their pasts, their hopes, their views on everything from politics to proper pie crust. Sarah learned that Lucas had grown up on a small farm in Ohio before moving west with his parents as a young man. He'd met his wife, Rebecca, in Kansas, where they'd staked a claim and begun building a life together. The raid that had taken Rebecca and their unborn child had been swift, and brutal renegades looking for easy targets had struck while Lucas was in town trading grain. By the time he returned, smoke was rising from the ruins of his cabin, and Rebecca was beyond help. In turn, Sarah shared the story of her childhood in Missouri, her years teaching in Texas, and her whirlwind courtship with Thomas Barlow, a charming salesman with dreams bigger than his abilities. She described her gradual realization that Thomas's promises were empty, his business ventures doomed by his penchant for gambling and liquor. By the time he disappeared, leaving her pregnant and surrounded by creditors, Sarah had already begun steeling herself for a future without him. "I should have seen it sooner," she told Lucas one evening as they sat by the fire in the parlor, her fingers busy with baby clothes, his whittling a small wooden horse. "There were signs from the beginning." "Love makes us blind sometimes," Lucas replied, carefully shaping the horse's mane with his knife. "It wasn't love, not really," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Infatuation, maybe, or just the desire to believe someone could take care of me." She set down her sewing. "I won't make that mistake again." Lucas looked up from his carving. "What mistake? Depending on someone else for my happiness, for my survival." Her hand moved to her belly. "My child deserves a mother who stands on her own feet. Standing on your own doesn't mean standing alone," Lucas said quietly. "There's strength in accepting help when it's offered in good faith." Sarah studied him, this man who had literally picked her up when she couldn't walk another step. "Yes," she agreed softly, "I'm beginning to understand that." As November turned to December, Chloride was transformed by an unusual snowfall that blanketed the desert landscape in white. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching the silent flakes drift past the glass, marveling at the beauty of the transformed world. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called. Alina entered, carrying a steaming mug. "Thought you might like some hot chocolate," she said, placing it on the bedside table. "Lucas brought back the chocolate from Kingman yesterday, a special request." Sarah smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. "He's been very kind," Alina snorted. "Girl, that man is in love with you, has been since he brought you here with those sad eyes and bare feet." Sarah blushed, turning back to the window. "It's complicated, Alina." "Only because you're making it so." The older woman sat on the edge of the bed. "I've known Lucas Keller for years, watched him drift through life like a ghost after he lost his wife. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "I'm having another man's child," Sarah reminded her. "And you think Lucas doesn't know that? You think he cares?" Alina shook her head. "That baby is innocent, and Lucas knows better than most that family isn't always about blood." Sarah sipped the chocolate, letting the sweet warmth spread through her. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally. "Of Lucas? No, of hoping again, of building dreams on promises that might disappear like morning mist." She placed a protective hand over her belly, now heavy with child. "I can't afford to be wrong again." Alina rose, patting Sarah's shoulder gently. "Fear is natural. But don't let it rob you of something real." She moved toward the door. "Lucas is in the kitchen, by the way, says he has something to show you when you're ready." Curious, Sarah finished her chocolate, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and made her way downstairs. She found Lucas at the kitchen table, surrounded by tools and pieces of wood, his face intent with concentration. "Alina said you wanted to see me," Sarah said, announcing her presence. Lucas looked up, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. "Yes, I have something for you." "For the baby, actually." He stepped aside, revealing what he'd been working on. It was a cradle, beautifully crafted from pine, with gently curved rockers and a headboard carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she moved forward, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Lucas," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "It still needs a coat of varnish," he said, watching her reaction anxiously, "and Aliner's going to sew bedding for it. I thought it could go in your room, next to your bed, so you don't have to get up so much at night." Sarah looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You made this. When did you have time?" "Been working on it for weeks, a little each evening after you went to bed," Lucas admitted. "I wanted it to be a surprise." "It is," Sarah said, deeply moved by the hours of careful labor the cradle represented. "The most wonderful surprise." Lucas hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "Sarah, I know you've been hurt. I know you're cautious about trusting again. But I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever you decide, this child will never lack for anything I can provide." The simple sincerity in his voice broke something open inside Sarah, a wall she'd built around her heart since Thomas's betrayal. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward and kissed Lucas gently on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin. Lucas stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. When Sarah stepped back, his eyes were filled with a tender hope that made her own heart swell with answering emotion. "Would you like to go for a walk?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. "The snow's stopped and the town looks different, all covered in white." Sarah nodded, suddenly eager to be outside in the clean winter air, away from watching eyes. "I'd like that very much." Lucas helped her into her coat and wrapped a woolen scarf around her neck. Together, they stepped out into the transformed landscape, their footprints the first to mark the pristine snow on the boarding house steps. They walked slowly down the quiet street, the usual bustle of the mining town muted by the snowfall. Christmas decorations adorned some of the storefronts, pine boughs and red ribbons bringing festive cheer to the frontier settlement. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Like another world," Lucas agreed, steadying her with a gentle hand at her elbow as they navigated the slippery boardwalk. They reached the small town square, where a pine tree had been erected and decorated with paper stars and strips of colored cloth. In the pristine snow surrounding it, their footprints were the only marks. "I never expected to feel this way again," Lucas said suddenly, his voice quiet in the winter stillness. Sarah turned to look at him, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "What way?" "Hopeful," he replied simply. "After Rebecca died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But then I found you, walking alone through the desert, and something changed." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as he continued. "I'm not asking for promises, Sarah. I know your baby will be here soon, and you have enough to worry about without adding my feelings to the list. But I wanted you to know," he took a deep breath, "I'm falling in love with you, and if you ever think you might feel something similar, I'll be here waiting." Snow continued to fall around them, isolating them in a private world of white. Sarah studied Lucas's face, the earnest blue eyes, the strong lines softened by vulnerability. The hope and fear mingled in his expression as he waited for her response. In that moment, Sarah Barlow made a decision that had been forming in her heart for weeks. She reached for Lucas's hand, twining her fingers with his. "I walked barefoot across the desert because I had no choice," she said softly, "but I've been walking toward you my whole life without knowing it." She squeezed his hand. "I'm falling in love with you too, Lucas Keller, and it terrifies me." A smile broke across his face, transforming his features. "We can be terrified together then," he said, raising their joined hands to press a kiss against her knuckles. Sarah laughed, the sound bright in the snowy silence. "That doesn't sound very reassuring." "How about this then?" Lucas said, his expression growing serious. "I promise to be honest with you always, to protect you and your child with my life if necessary. To work hard every day to deserve your trust, and to never, ever leave you to walk alone again." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, freezing slightly in the winter air. "That sounds very reassuring indeed." Lucas reached out tentatively, brushing a tear away with his thumb. Then, with infinite gentleness, he leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were warm despite the cold, and Sarah felt herself melting into the kiss, her heart opening fully for the first time in years. When they finally drew apart, they remained close, foreheads touching, breath mingling in the space between them. Mrs. Wright is going to be insufferably smug about this, Sarah murmured, making Lucas laugh. She's been matchmaking since the day we arrived, he agreed. They began walking back toward the boarding house, hand in hand now without hesitation. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, but neither looked back. Christmas in Chloride was a community affair, with the small church filled to overflowing for the Christmas Eve service. Sarah sat beside Lucas in a pew near the back, her hand resting in his as the congregation sang carols by lamplight. Eleanor sat on her other side, looking pleased with the world in general and the couple beside her in particular. In the 3 weeks since their walk in the snow, Lucas had begun courting Sarah properly, with Eleanor's enthusiastic blessing. They took meals together, walked through town when weather permitted, and spent evenings by the fire planning for the future, a future they now openly acknowledged would include them both. Lucas had moved his few possessions into a room down the hall from Sarah's, close enough to be called if needed but maintaining propriety in the small community where gossip traveled faster than telegrams. He had spoken to Reverend Collins about their situation, explaining his intentions toward Sarah and requesting the minister's counsel on navigating their unconventional circumstances. The Reverend, a practical man accustomed to the realities of frontier life, had been supportive, suggesting that Lucas and Sarah wait until after the baby's birth before making any formal announcements to the community. God's grace works in mysterious ways, he'd told them. And bringing good from difficulty is his specialty. As the Christmas service concluded, several of Eleanor's other boarders and regular diners gathered around Sarah, offering good wishes and small gifts for the baby. The community had embraced her as one of their own, her circumstances accepted without judgment in a place where everyone had a past they'd left behind. Lucas watched with quiet pride as Sarah thanked each well-wisher graciously, her natural dignity and warmth drawing people to her. In just a few short months, she had transformed from a desperate woman fleeing disaster to a respected member of the Chloride community. Back at the boarding house, Eleanor had prepared a special Christmas Eve dinner for her residents. The table was laden with roast venison, potatoes, fresh bread, and pies made from preserved fruits. Candles and pine boughs decorated the dining room, and a small tree stood in the corner, adorned with popcorn strings and paper ornaments made by the children of the town. "Before we eat," Eleanor announced, "I believe Lucas has something he'd like to say." All eyes turned to Lucas, who stood somewhat self-consciously at his place beside Sarah. He cleared his throat, unaccustomed to being the center of attention. "I wanted to thank you all for making Chloride feel like home these past months," he began. "Many of you know that I've spent years drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots, but that's changed now." He looked down at Sarah, who gazed up at him with such tenderness that his voice briefly failed him. "I've asked Sarah to marry me after her baby arrives," he continued when he'd regained his composure. "And she's agreed. We wanted you all to know as you've become our family here." Exclamations of delight and congratulations erupted around the table. Mrs. Daniels, a widow who took her meals at Eleanor's, wiped away happy tears. Mr. Peterson, an elderly miner who had retired to a small cabin in town, thumped the table in approval, making the silverware jump. "Well, it's about time," declared Eleanor, her face wreathed in smiles. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to make you see sense." Everyone laughed, and Sarah blushed prettily. Lucas retook his seat, reaching for her hand beneath the table and finding it already reaching for his. The meal that followed was filled with laughter and stories, the small group celebrating not just Christmas, but the promise of new beginnings. Lucas found himself talking and laughing more than he had in years, the weight of solitude lifting from his shoulders with each passing moment. After dinner, as the other guests retired to the parlor for coffee and dessert, Lucas led Sarah to the porch, where they could have a moment alone beneath the star-filled sky. The night was cold but clear, the earlier snow glittering in the moonlight. "Happy?" Lucas asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied, leaning against him. Though I think your proposal announcement came as a surprise to exactly no one. Lucas chuckled, slipping an arm around her waist. Eleanor's been telling everyone who'll listen that we were destined for each other since the moment I rode into town with you on Copper. She may have been right, Sarah admitted, turning to face him, though I was too scared and stubborn to see it at first. I'd have waited as long as necessary, Lucas said simply. Some things are worth waiting for. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Lucas, are you certain about this? About us? The baby will be here soon and it's not He stopped her with a gentle finger against her lips. That child became mine the moment I found you walking barefoot across the desert, he said firmly. Blood doesn't make a family, Sarah. Love does. And I already love this baby because it's part of you. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. What did I do to deserve you? You kept walking when anyone else would have given up, Lucas answered, brushing a tear from her cheek. You showed me what real courage looks like, and you taught me that life doesn't end with loss, it just takes a different path. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. I have something for you, a Christmas gift. Sarah carefully unwrapped the bundle to reveal a slender gold ring with a small pearl set in its center. It was my mother's, Lucas explained. I've carried it with me since she passed, waiting for the right moment, the right person. With trembling fingers, Sarah slipped the ring onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly, catching the moonlight with a soft glow. It's beautiful, she whispered. Like you, Lucas replied, drawing her close for a kiss that sealed their promise more surely than any words could have done. From inside the boarding house came the sound of laughter and someone beginning to play a Christmas carol on the parlor piano. But Lucas and Sarah remained on the porch a while longer, held in the perfect moment of happiness neither had dared hope for just months before. The new year brought heavy snowfalls that temporarily isolated Chloride from neighboring settlements. The mines continued to operate, men trudging through deep drifts to extract the silver that was the town's lifeblood, but travel was limited to essential journeys only. For Sarah, now in her final month of pregnancy, the enforced quiet was a blessing. Dr. Wilson visited weekly, pronouncing her much improved from their first meeting, but insisting she remain inside and avoid any unnecessary exertion. The baby could come any day now, he told her during his visit in mid-January. Everything appears normal, but first babies often take their time. Sarah nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. Though she had Eleanor's experience to guide her and Lucas's unwavering support, the prospect of childbirth filled her with trepidation. Will you stay in town until it's time? She asked the doctor. The passes are still blocked with snow. I'm not going anywhere, Dr. Wilson assured her. I've arranged with the telegraph operator to send a message to my office immediately if you need me, day or night. After he left, Sarah sat in the rocking chair Lucas had placed near the window in her room, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. The wooden cradle stood ready beside her bed, lined with soft blankets sewn by Eleanor and the other women who had befriended her. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Come in, she called. Lucas entered, snow still clinging to his coat and hat. He'd been helping clear paths in town, making sure essential routes remained passable despite the continuing snowfall. Dr. Wilson just left, Sarah told him. He says everything looks good. Lucas smiled, removing his hat and brushing snow from his shoulders. Glad to hear it. How are you feeling? Tired, impatient. She laughed softly. Enormous. You look beautiful, Lucas said, his gaze warm with admiration. You're biased, Sarah replied, but she blushed with pleasure. Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. I finished the last details on the house today. In the weeks since Christmas, Lucas had been working on a small cabin on the outskirts of Chloride, a simple 2-room structure that would be their first home together after the wedding. Eleanor had insisted they stay at the boarding house until spring, but Lucas wanted their own place ready when the time came. Really? Sarah's face lit up. When can I see it? As soon as the snow lets up enough for us to get there safely, Lucas promised. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid and warm. I've put in a good stove and windows on 3 sides so you'll have plenty of light. Sarah squeezed his hand, imagining the life they would build there, Lucas, herself, and the baby soon to join them. It sounds perfect, she said softly. Lucas reached up to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. You've changed everything, Sarah. Before I found you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without purpose. Now I have something to build, something to protect, a future worth fighting for. Sarah leaned into his touch. We'll build it together. Later that night, Sarah woke to a sharp pain that stole her breath. She lay still, counting slowly until it passed, then carefully rose and lit the lamp beside her bed. The clock on the wall showed just past midnight. Another pain gripped her 20 minutes later, this one stronger than the first. Sarah breathed through it as Alina had instructed her, then reached for the shawl draped over the foot of her bed. Moving carefully to avoid creaking floorboards, she made her way downstairs to Alina's room. The older woman was instantly alert when Sarah knocked, opening her door in her nightgown, hair in a long silver braid down her back. "Is it time?" she asked, noting Sarah's expression. Sarah nodded, another contraction building. "I think so. The pains are about 20 minutes apart." Alina guided her to a chair. "Let's get you comfortable. I'll wake Mary to sit with you while I fetch the doctor and Lucas." Mary, a young widow who had recently come to work at the boarding house, was quickly roused and set to heating water and preparing the room. Alina wrapped herself in a heavy coat and went first to Lucas's room, then out into the snowy night to summon Dr. Wilson. Lucas appeared at Sarah's door moments later, hair tousled from sleep but eyes alert with concern and excitement. "It's happening," he asked, kneeling beside her chair. Sarah nodded, reaching for his hand as another contraction began. "Early stages yet," she managed through gritted teeth. Dr. Wilson said it could be hours. Lucas stayed with her, his steady presence a comfort as the pains came closer together. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth, supported her as she walked slowly around the room between contractions, and whispered encouragement when the pain became intense. Dr. Wilson arrived within the hour, bringing his medical bag and a calm efficiency that reassured them all. After examining Sarah, he confirmed that her labor was progressing normally but still in the early stages. "Try to rest between contractions if you can," he advised. "Save your strength for later." The night passed slowly, each hour marked by increasing pain and decreasing intervals between contractions. Lucas remained steadfast at Sarah's side until dawn, when the doctor finally declared it was time for the men to leave the room. "I'll be right outside," Lucas promised, pressing a kiss to Sarah's damp forehead. "I know," she whispered, clinging to his hand until the next contraction forced her to let go. The morning sun was high in the sky by the time the piercing cry of a newborn broke the tense silence that had fallen over the boarding house. Lucas, who had been pacing the hallway for hours, froze at the sound, his heart hammering in his chest. The door opened and Alina emerged, her face tired but radiant. "You have a son," she told Lucas, "a healthy, strong boy with a fine set of lungs." Lucas sagged against the wall in relief. "And Sarah, exhausted but well," Alina assured him. "Dr. Wilson says she came through beautifully." "Can I see them?" Alina nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. The room was warm and dim, the curtains drawn against the bright winter sun. Sarah lay in the bed, her face pale but peaceful, her hair spread across the pillow in damp tendrils. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny bundle from which emerged occasional squawks of protest. Lucas approached softly, overwhelmed by the scene before him. Sarah looked up as he neared, her tired face breaking into a luminous smile. "Meet your son," she said, adjusting the blanket to reveal a small, red face with a surprising amount of dark hair. Lucas sank to his knees beside the bed, one trembling finger reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Sarah asked. With infinite care, Lucas took the newborn in his arms, cradling him close to his chest. The baby's eyes, still unfocused, seemed to search his face before closing again in sleep. "Hello, little one," Lucas murmured. "I've been waiting to meet you." Sarah watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she was feeling. "What should we call him?" she asked. Lucas looked up, surprised. "You want me to help name him?" "Of course," Sarah said softly. "You're his father in every way that matters." Lucas gazed down at the sleeping infant, considering. What about William? He suggested. After my father, William Thomas Barlow. Thomas? Sarah questioned, surprised he would suggest her absent husband's name. He gave this child life, whatever else he did, Lucas said gently. That deserves acknowledgement. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at his generosity of spirit. William Thomas it is, then, but when we marry, I'd like him to have your name too, William Thomas Barlow Keller. I'd be honored, Lucas said, his voice husky with emotion. He carefully returned the baby to Sarah's arms, then leaned forward to kiss her forehead. Rest now, he whispered. I'll be here when you wake. Promise? Sarah murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Always, Lucas replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. I'll be here always. Spring came late to northern Arizona that year. Snow lingered in shaded areas well into March, and the mountain passes remained treacherous even as wildflowers began to bloom in the lower valleys. For Sarah, the slow thaw matched her own gradual recovery, each day bringing renewed strength as she adjusted to motherhood. William Willie, as he quickly became known, thrived under the attention of not just his mother and Lucas, but the entire boarding house. Eleanor doted on him shamelessly, and even the gruff miners who took their meals at the long table would soften at the sight of his toothless smile. By April, Sarah was fully recovered, and preparations for the wedding were underway. Reverend Collins had agreed to perform the ceremony on the first Saturday in May, when the weather would be dependably warm and the desert in full bloom. The evening before the wedding, Lucas took Sarah and Willie to see their new home for the first time. The small cabin stood on a gentle rise just outside town, far enough for privacy but close enough for safety and convenience. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, and flower boxes hung empty beneath the windows, waiting for Sarah's touch. It's wonderful, Sarah breathed as Lucas carried Willie up the steps, her free hand lifting her skirts above the dusty path. Inside, the main room was simple but thoughtfully arranged. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair similar to the one in Sarah's room at the boarding house placed beside it. A sturdy table with 4 chairs stood near the kitchen area, where a cast iron stove gleamed with newness. Shelves lined one wall, holding a few books, dishes, and essential supplies. The bedroom's through here, Lucas said, leading her to a doorway covered with a curtain. Beyond was a smaller room containing a double bed with a handmade quilt, a chest of drawers, and Willie's cradle, moved from the boarding house and positioned near the bed. I thought we could build an addition later, Lucas explained, bouncing Willie gently in his arms. Give him his own room when he's a bit older. Sarah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in this home Lucas had created for them, the physical manifestation of his promises. When did you find time to do all this? She asked, running her hand over the smooth wood of the dresser. Evenings, days off, Lucas replied. The men from the mine helped with the heavy work raising the walls, setting the roof beams. They were happy to do it. You've made quite an impression on this town, Sarah. She looked at him, this man who had rescued her in more ways than she could count. So have you. They see the same thing I do, a good man with a generous heart. Lucas ducked his head, still unaccustomed to praise. I wanted to give you a proper home. You and Willie deserve that. Sarah crossed to him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Home isn't about the walls and roof, Lucas. It's about the people inside them. You've been my home since you found me on that desert trail. Willie gurgled between them, waving a tiny fist as if in agreement. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers through the open windows of the boarding house. Sarah stood in her room, Eleanor and Mary helping her prepare for the ceremony. Her dress, a simple creation of ivory silk, had been ordered from Prescott and altered to fit her post-pregnancy figure. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with small white flowers gathered that morning from the hillsides around Chloride. You look beautiful, dear, Eleanor said, adjusting the lace at Sarah's collar. Lucas won't know what hit him. Sarah smiled nervously, checking on Willie, who slept peacefully in his cradle, dressed in a new white gown sewn by Eleanor for the occasion. I never thought I'd have this, Sarah admitted quietly. After Thomas left, I believed that part of my life was over, All I wanted was to find a safe place for Willie and myself. And instead, you found a family, Eleanor said, squeezing her hand. That's how life works sometimes gives you something better than what you thought you wanted. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mr. Peterson, who had offered to escort Sarah to the church in place of her absent father. "Ready, my dear?" he asked, his weathered face creased in a kind smile. Sarah nodded, gathering Willie carefully in her arms. Ready. The small church was filled to capacity, the entire town having turned out for the occasion. Wildflowers decorated every surface, their vibrant colors brightening the simple wooden interior. At the front, Lucas waited beside Reverend Collins, his usually casual appearance transformed by a new suit and freshly trimmed hair. As Sarah walked down the aisle, Willie cradled against her shoulder. A hush fell over the congregation. Lucas watched her approach, his expression a mixture of awe and devotion that made her heart swell with answering love. The ceremony was simple and moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged the unusual path that had brought them together and the challenges they had already overcome. When Lucas placed his mother's ring on Sarah's finger, now accompanied by a simple gold band, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Collins concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas, you may kiss your bride." Lucas stepped forward, cradling Sarah's face in his hands with infinite tenderness. Between them, Willie stirred, blinking up at his parents with unfocused curiosity. "Hello, family," Lucas whispered, including them both in his gaze before kissing Sarah to the cheers and applause of their friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed spilled from the church into the town square, where tables had been set up and loaded with food contributed by every household in Chloride. Music from fiddles and a banjo filled the air, and lanterns were strung between buildings in preparation for when darkness fell. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, Lucas found Sarah sitting with Eleanor, Willie sleeping in her arms despite the noise and activity around them. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, extending his hand with a formal bow that made Sarah laugh. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Keller," she replied, carefully transferring Willie to Eleanor's waiting arms. Lucas led her to the center of the improvised dance floor, drawing her close as the musicians began a waltz. Other couples joined them, but for Sarah and Lucas, it might as well have been just the two of them beneath the desert stars. "Happy?" Lucas asked, echoing the question he had asked her on Christmas Eve. "Completely," Sarah answered without hesitation. "Are you?" Lucas looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "I never knew it was possible to be this happy," he said simply. "You and Willie have given me back my life, Sarah, a reason to build something lasting." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When you found me on that trail, I was at my lowest point alone, desperate, afraid. I thought I was walking toward an uncertain future, but really I was walking toward you." Lucas tightened his arms around her. "And I'll walk beside you for the rest of our days," he promised, "no matter where life leads us." As night fell fully over Chloride, the stars emerged in brilliant clarity, witnessing the celebration of a love that had begun with an unexpected encounter on a desert trail. Sarah and Lucas danced beneath those stars, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, their sons sleeping peacefully in the arms of the woman who had helped make their union possible. Later, as they walked together toward their new home, Willie nestled in Lucas's arms and Sarah's hand tucked securely in his elbow. Sarah looked up at the vast sky overhead and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here barefoot and desperate across the desert, to the side of a man whose quiet strength and boundless heart had saved them both. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary miracles of family life. Willie grew from an infant to a toddler, his first steps taken across the wooden floor of their cabin, his first words a garbled attempt at "Papa" that had brought tears to Lucas's eyes. The mine continued to produce silver, providing steady work for Lucas, who had been promoted to head of security after preventing a theft that would have cost the company thousands. Sarah found her place in the community as well. When Chloride's population grew large enough to warrant a proper school, she was the natural choice for teacher, her previous experience and gentle authority making her perfect for the position. She taught during the day while Alina happily cared for Willie, then returned home each afternoon to her family. On their second wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Sarah with deeds to both their cabin and a small parcel of land adjacent to it. "The mine gave me a bonus," he explained as she examined the papers with amazement. "I thought we might expand the house now that Willie's getting bigger, maybe add a proper garden for you." "It's wonderful," Sarah said, embracing him tightly. "Our own land, Lucas, something permanent." He kissed the top of her head. "I have news too," he said. "Reverend Collins received a letter from the territorial governor last week. They're establishing a proper sheriff's office in Chloride with jurisdiction over the surrounding area. He's recommended me for the position." Sarah pulled back to look at him, concern mingling with pride in her expression. "A sheriff, Lucas, that could be dangerous." "Less dangerous than the mine," he countered gently. "And it would mean regular hours, better pay, a chance to help shape this community as it grows." He took her hands in his. "But I won't accept if you object. We decide this together." Sarah considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You'd be a good sheriff, Lucas, fair and honest." She squeezed his hands. "If this is what you want, I support you." "There's something else," Lucas said, a hint of nervousness entering his voice. "Something I've been wanting to discuss with you." Sarah raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Willie's getting older," Lucas began. "I was thinking, perhaps it's time he had a brother or sister." A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "Really?" Lucas's expression brightened with hope. "Really," Sarah confirmed, her smile turning mischievous. "In fact, I was planning to tell you tonight that your wish will be granted sometime around Christmas." Lucas stared at her in stunned silence for a moment before comprehension dawned. We're going to have a baby," Sarah finished for him, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "When did you find out?" he asked, setting her down gently as if she might break. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Lucas placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." The wonder in his voice touched Sarah deeply. Though he had embraced Willie as his own from the beginning, this child would be different, a physical manifestation of their love, conceived in joy rather than desperation. "Are you pleased?" she asked softly. In answer, Lucas gathered her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not express. That winter, as snow once again blanketed the high desert around Chloride, Sheriff Lucas Keller paced the hallway of their expanded home while Dr. Wilson attended to Sarah in their bedroom. 3-year-old Willie sat on Alina's lap in the kitchen, solemnly eating the cookies she had brought to distract him from the muffled sounds of his mother's labor. Unlike Willie's birth, this time Lucas had been with Sarah through most of the process, leaving only when Dr. Wilson insisted it was time for the final stage. Now he waited, alternately praying and making bargains with God, promising anything if only Sarah and the baby would be safe. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the silence, Lucas stopped mid-pace, his heart hammering in his chest. The bedroom door opened and Dr. Wilson emerged, his face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Sheriff," he said, extending his hand. "You have a beautiful daughter." Lucas gripped the doctor's hand, emotion rendering him momentarily speechless. "And Sarah, doing wonderfully, Doctor." Wilson assured him. "She's asking for you." Lucas entered the bedroom to find Sarah propped against pillows, her face flushed but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile as bright as the day he'd married her. "Come meet your daughter," she said, adjusting the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair. Lucas's hair. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. "She's so small," he whispered. "But strong," Sarah replied. "Just like her father." Lucas leaned forward to kiss Sarah's forehead. "You are amazing," he told her. "Absolutely incredible." A knock at the door announced Willie, no longer content to wait in the kitchen. He peered around the doorframe, his expression curious and slightly uncertain. "Come here, sweetheart," Sarah called softly. Come meet your sister. With Lucas's encouragement, Willie approached the bed and climbed up beside his mother. He stared at the baby with wide eyes. She's very little, he observed seriously. Yes, she is, Lucas agreed, putting an arm around his son. That means we have to help take care of her. Can you do that? Be a big brother. Willie considered this responsibility with all the gravity a 3-year-old could muster, then nodded. I can do it, Papa. What shall we call her? Sarah asked, looking between her husband and son. Lucas had been thinking about names for months. What about Rebecca? He suggested quietly. After my first wife, she would have loved you, Sarah, and these children. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes at the generous spirit behind the suggestion. Rebecca Aliner Keller, she said, glancing toward the door where Aliner had appeared, her own eyes suspiciously bright. A beautiful name for a beautiful girl. As night fell over Chloride, the Keller family remained together in the warm bedroom, Willie eventually falling asleep against Lucas's side, little Rebecca nursing contentedly in Sarah's arms. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their home in pristine white, but inside was all warmth and love and the quiet miracle of family. I never imagined this, Sarah said softly, careful not to wake the sleeping children. When I was walking across that desert, all I hoped for was survival. I never dreamed of happiness like this. Lucas reached across Willie to take her hand, his thumb brushing over the rings he had placed there, symbols of a promise kept through all the days since he had first ridden beside a barefoot, pregnant woman too proud to ask for help. You were walking toward home, he told her, and so was I, we just didn't know it yet. Sarah smiled, the love in her eyes reflecting the journey that had brought them to this moment from desperate strangers to a family bound by choice as much as circumstance. Their lives intertwined in ways neither could have imagined on that dusty trail beneath the Arizona sun. Outside their window, the first stars appeared in the clearing sky, witnesses to the quiet joy within a joy built day by day from courage and kindness, from faith in possibilities, and from the love that had begun when a cowboy rode beside a barefoot woman on the long road home.